The November wind cut through Clara's threadbare dress like 1,000 knives as she stumbled through the pine forest, her bare feet bleeding onto the frozen ground. Behind her, somewhere in the darkness, her stepfather's drunken shouts still echoed. She'd finally run after he'd tried to sell her to a traveling merchant for 2 bottles of whiskey and a worn saddle. The gold locket around her neck, her mother's last gift, pressed cold against her skin, a reminder that she'd once been loved, once been worthy of something more than this. Her legs gave out beneath a towering ponderosa pine, and she collapsed into the needles, shaking so violently her teeth rattled. The temperature was dropping fast. She wouldn't survive the night out here. Maybe that was mercy. Before we continue with Clara's journey, I'd love to ask you to take a moment to subscribe to the channel and leave a like on this video. It truly means everything to us and motivates us to bring you more quality stories like this one. Also, I'm curious, where are you listening from right now? Let me know in the comments. The crunch of boots on frost made her head snap up. Through her blurred vision, she saw him, a massive silhouette, carrying an axe over one shoulder. A cord of wood balanced on the other. Even in the moonlight, she could see he was enormous, well over 6 feet, with shoulders that could carry the world. His dark hair fell past his collar, and a thick beard covered his jaw. "Please," Clara whispered, fumbling with the locket's clasp. "I have this. It's gold. Real gold. Just let me sleep in your barn. One night. I'll be gone before dawn." The man set down his wood slowly, his dark eyes studying her with an intensity that made her want to disappear. He moved closer, and she flinched, but he simply crouched down to her level, making himself smaller, less threatening. "Gold isn't what's needed here," he said, his voice a deep rumble like distant thunder. "You are. A person freezing to death on my land." He shrugged off his heavy bearskin coat and wrapped it around her shoulders before she could protest. The warmth of it, still holding his body heat, made her gasp. "Name's Jacob Thorne. I'm a woodsman, and that's my cabin just beyond those trees. Can you walk?" Clara tried to stand, but her legs wouldn't cooperate. Without a word, Jacob scooped her up as easily as if she weighed nothing, cradling her against his chest. She should have been afraid. She'd learned to fear men's strength, but something in his careful hold told her she was safe. The cabin was small but solid, built from logs Jacob had clearly hewn himself. A massive stone fireplace dominated one wall, already burning bright. He set her down in a chair near the fire and immediately went to work, stoking the flames higher, heating water in a kettle, pulling blankets from a cedar chest. "Your feet are torn up," he said, kneeling before her. "Going to clean them. I'll be gentle." Clara watched in stunned silence as this mountain of a man carefully washed her feet with warm water. His massive hands impossibly tender, as he cleaned each cut and scrape. When she winced, he paused. "Go slow," she whispered. "It hurts." "I'll die before I hurt you," he replied simply, and something in the way he said it made her believe him. He bandaged her feet with strips of clean cloth, then stood to ladle stew from a pot hanging over the fire. A smell made her stomach clench with hunger. When had she last eaten? 2 days? 3? "You'll stay here tonight," Jacob said, handing her a bowl. "Tomorrow we'll figure out what comes next. But first, you eat, then you sleep. You're safe here." "Why are you helping me?" Clara asked, her voice breaking. "You don't know me. I could be anyone. Jacob settled into a chair across from her, his own bowl balanced on his knee. I see a woman worth saving. That's all I need to know. That night, he gave her his bed, a simple but comfortable frame covered in quilts and furs. He took a bedroll near the fire, his back to her to give her privacy. But Clara couldn't sleep. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw her stepfather's face, felt his hands grabbing at her. Can't sleep? Jacob's voice came soft through the darkness. I keep thinking he'll find me, she admitted. Keep thinking I'll wake up and this will all be a dream. She heard him shift, and then his silhouette appeared beside the bed. He didn't touch her, just sat on the floor with his back against the bed frame. I'll be right here. No one's getting past me. You have my word. Why are you doing this? She asked again. The fire's glow caught his profile, strong jaw, straight nose, eyes that had seen their share of sorrow. 5 years ago, my wife and daughter were traveling to meet me at a new timber site. Their wagon broke down in a storm. They froze to death before help came. I found them 3 days later. His voice was rough with old pain. I swore then that if I ever had the chance to save someone from the cold, I'd do it. No questions asked. Clara's hand found his shoulder, and she felt him stiffen at the contact. I'm so sorry. That's why I live alone out here. Why I cut timber instead of working the camps with other men. Couldn't bear getting close to anyone again. He turned to look at her then, and in his eyes, she saw a reflection of her own loneliness. But then you showed up on my land, and I couldn't just walk away. The days that followed fell into a rhythm. Clara's feet healed slowly, and Jacob taught her how to survive in the wilderness. He showed her which plants were edible, how to track game by their prints in the snow, how to read the weather in the clouds. His patience seemed endless, his presence steady as the mountains themselves. Hold the rifle like this, he said one afternoon, positioning himself behind her, his arms bracketing hers to guide her aim. Feel how it sits against your shoulder. That's where the kick will be. Don't fight it, just breathe through it. Clara was acutely aware of his chest pressed against her back, the warmth of him seeping through her borrowed shirt, one of his, cinched with a belt because it was far too large. Her heart hammered, but not from fear. Now squeeze the trigger. Gentle, like you're coaxing, not demanding. The rifle cracked, and the tin can 20 yards away flew into the air. Clara laughed, the sound surprising them both. You're a natural, Jacob said, but he didn't step away immediately. For a heartbeat, they stayed frozen, and Clara felt the tension between them shift into something electric, something dangerous. He pulled back abruptly. You'll be able to protect yourself now. That's important. The unspoken words hung between them. When you leave, when you're ready to move on. But Clara wasn't thinking about leaving. She was thinking about the way Jacob split wood each morning, his shirt clinging to his muscular frame. The way he hummed old songs while cooking dinner. The way he left wildflowers on the table without comment. She was thinking about how, for the first time in her life, she felt valued, seen. One evening, she was mending one of his shirts by lamplight when he spoke from his chair by the fire. My stepfather, after my mother died last year, he started drinking more, got mean, decided I was property he could sell or trade. When he tried to hand me over to a man 3 times my age, I ran. He have any claim on you? Legal, I mean. I turned 20 last month. I'm free, by law, but he won't see it that way. He'll come looking eventually. Jacob's jaw tightened. Then we'll be ready. We? Clara looked up, her heart skipping. He met her eyes, and the intensity there stole her breath. "You think I'm gonna let anyone hurt you? Not while there's breath in my body." "Jacob, you don't owe me." "This isn't about owing." He stood, crossing to where she sat, and knelt down so they were eye level. "These past weeks, having you here, Clara, you've brought light back into this place, made me remember what it feels like to want to wake up in the morning. I know I said I wouldn't get close to anyone again, but you." He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. "You make me want to try." Clara's hand covered his, holding it against her cheek. "I'm scared," she whispered. "I'm scared of what I feel for you. Scared I'll be a burden. Scared you're not property," he said fiercely. "You're a person, a strong, brave, remarkable person. And if you'll have me, I'd like to stand beside you, not own you, not cage you, just be with you. Together." "Together," she echoed, and then she was leaning forward, and his lips met hers in a kiss that felt like coming home. The kiss deepened, gentle, but full of promise. When they finally broke apart, Jacob rested his forehead against hers. "I need to tell you something else," he said. "I'm not just a woodsman. I came out here after my family died because I was a lawman before, deputy in Denver. I know how to handle trouble. And I still have friends who wear badges. If your stepfather comes, we can deal with him legally. And if he comes with guns instead of papers..." Jacob's smile was grim. "Then he'll learn that I'm very good at protecting what's mine. If you'll be mine, Clara, if you'll have me." "Yes," she breathed. "Yes." Winter deepened, and with it, Clara and Jacob's bond grew stronger. He taught her to ice fish in the frozen creek, to snowshoe through the drifts, to read by firelight from his small collection of books. She taught him to laugh again, to hope, to believe that happiness wasn't something permanently lost. One December night, a blizzard howled outside, rattling the cabin's shutters. Clara woke shivering, despite the banked fire and the heavy quilts. She'd been dreaming of being lost in the snow, calling for help that never came. She found Jacob adding wood to the fire, his chest bare, sleep-tousled hair falling into his eyes. When he saw her trembling, he was at her side instantly. "I'm cold," she said, her voice shaking from more than just temperature. "I dreamed I was alone again. Lost." Jacob pulled her close, wrapping both his arms and a thick blanket around them both. He guided her to his bedroll near the fire, settling them down together, her back against his chest, surrounded by his warmth. "Then I'll be your fire until morning," he murmured against her hair. "And every morning after, if you'll let me. You're never going to be lost or alone again, Clara. I promise you that." She turned in his arms, looking up at his beloved face in the firelight. "Make me a different promise. Anything. Promise we'll face everything together, whatever comes. Promise you won't send me away to keep me safe. We're stronger together." He kissed her forehead, her cheeks, finally her lips. Together, always. They fell asleep wrapped around each other, the storm raging harmlessly outside, the fire keeping them warm. Spring came late to the mountains that year. By the time the snow began to melt, Clara had become as much a part of the wilderness as Jacob himself. She could track a deer through the forest, split kindling with an axe, and shoot well enough to bring down a rabbit at 50 yards. She was gathering early wildflowers one April morning when she heard horses approaching. Her hand went instinctively to the knife at her belt, another of Jacob's gifts. But then she recognized the badge glinting on the lead rider's vest. "Ma'am," the marshal said, tipping his hat. looking for Jacob Thorne. He around? Jacob emerged from the cabin, rifle in hand, but pointed down. Marshal Peters. What brings you up here? Got word you might have information about Calvin Hendricks. He's wanted for questioning about stolen property. Specifically, making false claims about a woman he says ran off with his belongings. Clara stepped forward. That's my stepfather. What's he claiming I stole? The marshal looked between them, understanding dawning. You must be Clara Hendricks. Your stepfather filed a complaint saying you stole money and a gold locket. Says you're unstable, can't be trusted on your own. That's a lie, Clara said firmly. The locket was my mother's, left to me in her will. I have the papers proving it. I took her in out of common decency, and she's been helping me with the timber operation since she recovered. The marshal nodded slowly. Mind if I take a statement, miss? Hendricks has been stirring up trouble in town, threatening to come up here with some hired guns to reclaim his property. Judge Blackwell wants to settle this legally before it gets violent. For the next hour, Clara told her story to the marshal, Jacob beside her, his hand steady on her shoulder. When she showed the papers she'd grabbed during her flight, her birth certificate, her mother's will, proof that she was of age, the marshal's expression grew grim. This is fraud on his part, miss. Possible kidnapping charges too, trying to sell you against your will. Judge will want to hear this. Would you be willing to testify? Clara looked at Jacob, who squeezed her hand. Together, he said quietly. I'll testify, she told the marshal. Good. I'll send word when the hearing's set. In the meantime, the marshal looked at Jacob. You planning to make an honest woman of her, Thorne? Might help her case if she's got legal protections as your wife. Jacob's jaw tightened. I'm not marrying her for legal convenience. When I ask Clara to be my wife, it'll be because I can't imagine living without her, not because some judge thinks it looks better on paper. Fair enough. The marshal tipped his hat. I'll be in touch. After he left, Clara turned to Jacob. You meant that? About marrying me? Every word. He cupped her face in his hands. I love you, Clara. I want you as my wife, my partner, my equal. But I want you to choose it freely, not because you're scared or need protection. You deserve to be chosen, not claimed out of necessity. I choose you, she whispered. I've been choosing you every day since that first night. I love you, Jacob Thorne. His kiss was her answer, fierce and tender all at once. The hearing came 3 weeks later. Calvin Hendricks showed up drunk and belligerent, and his story fell apart under the judge's questioning. When Clara presented her mother's will and testified about his attempt to sell her, the courtroom erupted in outrage. Hendricks was sentenced to 6 months in jail for fraud and fined heavily for his false accusations. Walking out of the courthouse, Clara felt like she could finally breathe. Jacob's arm was around her waist, solid and sure. It's over, she said wonderingly. It's really over. Not quite. Jacob stopped in the middle of the street, heedless of the curious onlookers, and dropped to one knee. From his pocket, he pulled out a simple silver band inlaid with a small piece of turquoise. I made this myself. The silver's from a vein I found near the cabin, and the stone is from the creek where you first laughed again. Clara Hendricks, will you marry me? Not for legal protection, not out of obligation, but because I love you with everything I am, and I want to spend every day of my life showing you how precious you are. Tears streamed down Clara's face. Yes. Yes, 1,000 times yes. He slipped the ring onto her finger and kissed her there in the street, while the town cheered around them. They were married the next day by the circuit preacher, with Marshal Peters and his wife as witnesses. Clara wore a simple blue dress, borrowed from the marshal's wife, and Jacob wore his cleanest shirt. They spoke their vows in the small church, promising to love and honor each other, to face life's challenges together, to build a home filled with warmth and laughter. As they walked back toward the mountains, hand in hand, Clara looked up at her husband, and smiled. "What are you thinking?" Jacob asked. "That I was so cold that night, frozen and afraid and ready to give up. And you became my fire. You still are, every single day." He pulled her close, kissing the top of her head. "And you brought me back to life, made me believe in second chances, in love." They reached the cabin as the sun set, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson. Inside, the fire Jacob had banked that morning had been restoked by a kind neighbor, and a basket of food sat on the table with a note wishing them happiness. That night, as they lay together in their bed, Clara traced the scars on Jacob's hands, marks from years of hard work, of survival, of choosing to keep going, even when grief nearly consumed him. "I'm going to spend the rest of my life making sure you never regret saving me," she whispered. "You already do," he replied, kissing her fingers. "Every single day, Clara. Every single day." Outside, the wind whispered through the pines, but inside the cabin, two hearts beat as one, warmed by a love that had been forged in the coldest night and would burn bright for all their days. The first test of their marriage came 6 weeks later, when the summer storms rolled in fiercer than Jacob had seen in years. The creek that normally babbled peacefully behind the cabin swelled into a raging torrent, threatening the bridge Jacob had built to reach his timber sites on the far side. Clara woke to find his side of the bed empty, rain hammering against the roof like 1,000 drummers. She dressed quickly and found him outside in the downpour, frantically reinforcing the bridge supports with additional logs. "Jacob," she shouted over the roar of water, "come inside. It's not safe. If this bridge goes, we lose access to 3 months' worth of cut timber," he yelled back, waist deep in the churning water. "I can save it." Clara watched in horror as a massive log, torn free from upstream, came barreling toward him. Without thinking, she grabbed the rope coiled near the cabin door and dove into the water. The cold was shocking, stealing her breath, but she swam hard, reaching Jacob just as the log struck. It hit his shoulder with a sickening crack, and he went under. Clara looped the rope around his chest and screamed, "Help! Someone help!" But there was no one. They were alone, miles from the nearest neighbor. It was just her. Summoning every ounce of strength Jacob had taught her over the past months, Clara hauled on the rope, dragging his unconscious body toward the bank. Her muscles screamed, her lungs burned, but she didn't stop. She couldn't stop. She finally got him onto solid ground and rolled him onto his side. Water poured from his mouth, and then he was coughing, gasping, alive. "Clara," he choked out. "The bridge!" "Damn the bridge," she sobbed, her hands shaking as she checked him for injuries. His left shoulder was already swelling, probably dislocated. "You could have..." She'd seen her mother treat similar injuries before. "This is going to hurt," she warned. "Do it." Clara braced herself and pulled, twisting at just the right angle. Jacob's roar of pain echoed through the cabin, but the shoulder popped back into place. She quickly fashioned a sling and made him drink some of the whiskey he kept for medicinal purposes. "You saved my life," he said, his good hand reaching for hers. "I was so focused on saving the timber." on proving I could provide for you, that I almost— Jacob Thorne, you listen to me, Clara said fiercely, kneeling beside him. I don't need timber. I don't need money. I need you, alive, safe, with me. We're partners, remember? That means we make decisions together. We take risks together. And we don't sacrifice ourselves for anything, not even our livelihood. He pulled her close with his good arm, burying his face in her wet hair. You're right. I'm sorry. I got so caught up in being the provider, the protector. I forgot that marriage means trusting you to protect me too. Together, she whispered. Together, he agreed. The bridge was lost, along with access to the fall timber sites. But over the next weeks, as Jacob healed, they worked out a new plan. Clara suggested they focus on the closer sites and invest in a partnership with another woodsman who could help during the heavy season. Jacob was reluctant at first. He'd been alone so long. But Clara reminded him that accepting help wasn't weakness, it was wisdom. By late summer, Jacob's shoulder had healed completely, though it ached before storms. He called it his weather predictor, and Clara would kiss it and say it was her favorite part of him because it reminded her that even strong men needed saving sometimes. Autumn brought— She'd never known her own father. He died before she was born. What if she didn't know how to be a mother? What if something went wrong? What if Jacob didn't want children so soon? She waited until that evening, until they were alone by the fire, before she spoke. Jacob, I need to tell you something. He looked up from the harness he was mending, immediately alert to the tremor in her voice. What's wrong? Nothing's wrong. At least, I don't think so. I just— She took a deep breath. I think I'm pregnant. The harness fell from his hands. For a long moment, he just stared at her, his expression unreadable. Then he crossed to her in 3 long strides and dropped to his knees, pressing his ear against her still flat stomach. Hello in there, he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. I'm your papa. And that's your mama, the bravest, strongest woman in all the world. We're going to love you so much. Tears streamed down Clara's face. You're happy? He looked up at her, and she saw tears on his own cheeks too. Clara, I never thought I'd have this again. A family. After I lost Elizabeth and little Mary, I thought that part of my life was over. But you've given me a second chance at everything. At love, at hope, at fatherhood. So yes, I'm happy. I'm terrified, but I'm happy. I'm terrified too, she admitted. What if I'm not a good mother? You'll be an incredible mother. You're strong, patient, brave, and you have the biggest heart of anyone I know. Our child. He placed his hand gently on her stomach. Our child is going to be so lucky to have you. The pregnancy was difficult. Clara's morning sickness lasted well into the afternoons, and by December, she was so large she could barely move comfortably. The winter was harsh, with storms that sometimes trapped them in the cabin for days at a time. One particularly brutal night in February, Clara woke to a contraction that stole her breath. Jacob was beside her instantly, his hand finding hers in the darkness. Is it time? He asked, trying to keep the fear from his voice. I think so. Another contraction hit, and she squeezed his hand hard enough that she felt his bones grind. Jacob, I'm scared. What if something goes wrong? We're so far from town, from the doctor. Look at me. He lit the lamp, and in the golden glow, his eyes held hers. You survived running through a frozen forest with nothing. You survived pulling me out of a raging river. You can survive this, and I'll be right here with you Every moment. Together, remember? Together, she gasped as another contraction rolled through her. The labor lasted through the night and into the next day. Jacob had helped deliver calves and foals, but this was different. This was his wife, his Clara. In pain, he couldn't stop. All he could do was hold her hand, wipe her brow, whisper encouragement, and pray. Finally, as the sun was setting on the second day, a baby's cry split the air. Jacob caught his daughter, their daughter, in his trembling hands, and his vision blurred with tears. "She's perfect," he whispered, carefully cleaning the baby and wrapping her in the soft blankets they'd prepared. "Clara, she's absolutely perfect." He placed the tiny bundle in Clara's exhausted arms and watched his wife's face transform as she looked at their child for the first time. "Elizabeth," Clara said softly, touching the baby's tiny nose. "Hello, sweet Elizabeth. We've been waiting for you." Jacob had worried that naming their daughter after his first wife might hurt, might bring back too much grief. But instead, he felt a sense of peace. Elizabeth's memory wasn't being replaced, it was being honored. Love wasn't a finite thing. His heart had simply grown larger to hold more. "She has your eyes," he said, settling beside Clara on the bed, wrapping them both in his arms. "And your stubborn chin," Clara replied, with a tired laugh. They stayed like that as darkness fell. The three of them cocooned together, while outside the wind howled and the snow fell. But inside, they had everything they needed. Elizabeth was 6 months old when the ghosts of the past came calling. Clara was in the garden behind the cabin. The baby strapped to her back in a carrier Jacob had fashioned from soft leather when she heard horses approaching. She knew that sound, multiple riders coming fast. Her hand went to the rifle leaning against the fence post, but she forced herself to stay calm. It could be innocent travelers. It could be Marshal Peters with news. But when the riders came into view, her blood turned to ice. Her stepfather, Calvin Hendricks, sat astride the lead horse. He should have been in jail. He'd been sentenced to 6 months, and it had only been 4. Behind him rode 3 rough-looking men, the kind who wore their violence like badges. "Well, well," Calvin sneered, climbing down from his horse. "Look at you, playing house. Thought you could just run off and forget about me, did you?" Clara slowly reached back and unstrapped Elizabeth, setting her gently in the protective box Jacob had built in the garden, a safe place where the baby could play while Clara worked. Then she picked up the rifle. "You're supposed to be in jail, Calvin." "Broke out 2 weeks ago." He spat tobacco juice onto the ground. "Been tracking you ever since. You owe me, girl. You cost me everything with your lies to that judge. Now you're going to make it right." "I owe you nothing. Leave now, or I'll shoot." Calvin laughed, but there was no humor in it. "You shoot? I taught you to be meek, remember? To keep your eyes down and your mouth shut. You ain't shooting nobody." "You taught me nothing but what kind of man to avoid," Clara said, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "I'll give you one more chance. Leave. Now." Instead, Calvin reached for his own weapon. Clara fired without hesitation. The shot went wide, deliberately so, kicking up dirt a foot from his horse's hooves. The animal reared, and Calvin cursed. "The next one won't miss," Clara said, already working the lever to chamber another round, exactly as Jacob had taught her. "I suggest you ride out while you still can." "You ungrateful little—" Calvin started forward, but then another rifle cocked behind Clara. I'd listen to the lady. Jacob's voice was cold as winter steel. Clara hadn't heard him approach, but there he stood, his own rifle aimed at Calvin's chest. Behind him, Samuel and two other woodsmen emerged from the trees, also armed. Didn't think to check if she was alone, did you? Jacob continued, moving to stand beside Clara. That's your first mistake. Your second was coming to my property threatening my wife. Your third was making her fear for our daughter's safety. Calvin's eyes darted between them, calculating odds. This ain't over. She's still She's my wife, Jacob interrupted. And you're a fugitive from justice. I count that as 2 reasons to kill you where you stand, and I'm struggling to think of a reason not to. Give me one. Give me one good reason I shouldn't end this right now. Because you're a lawman, Clara said softly, her hand finding Jacob's arm. Because we do this the right way, not his way. Jacob's jaw clenched, but he nodded. Samuel, ride to town. Get Marshal Peters. Tell him we have Calvin Hendricks and 3 accomplices held at gunpoint. Tell him to bring shackles. You're making a mistake, Calvin snarled. I'll get out again. I'll come back. You'll shut up, Jacob said flatly, or I'll reconsider my wife's mercy. They kept the 4 men under guard until the marshal arrived 3 hours later. Calvin hurled threats and insults the entire time, but Clara didn't flinch. She stood beside Jacob, rifle ready, while their daughter played contentedly in her box, oblivious to the danger. As the marshal led the prisoners away, Calvin turned back one last time. You ain't seen the last of me. Actually, you have, Marshal Peters said, almost cheerfully. Breaking out adds years to your sentence. Plus threatening and stalking add even more. You'll be an old man before you see freedom again, Hendricks. Best make peace with that. After they left, Clara's knees finally gave out. Jacob caught her, holding her close as she shook with reaction. He's gone, Jacob murmured against her hair. He's really gone this time. You were so brave, Clara. So strong. I wasn't brave. I was terrified. Bravery isn't the absence of fear. It's standing your ground despite it. You protected our daughter. You protected yourself. I'm so damn proud of you. Elizabeth chose that moment to start fussing, and they both laughed. Shaky, relieved laughter. Clara picked up their daughter, holding her close. It's over, she whispered. Really over. That night, as they lay in bed with Elizabeth sleeping peacefully in her cradle beside them, Jacob traced patterns on Clara's arm. I almost lost control today, he admitted. When I saw him threatening you, threatening our baby, I wanted to kill him, Clara. I wanted it so badly I could taste it. But you didn't. You chose the right path. Because of you, you kept me human when everything in me wanted to become a monster. Clara turned to face him in the darkness. We save each other, Jacob. That's what we do. That's what we'll always do. The years began to blur together in the best possible way. Not from monotony, but from contentment. Elizabeth grew from a baby into a curious toddler who fearlessly explored every corner of the property. Clara planted a larger garden and learned to preserve food for the harsh winters. Jacob's timber business thrived with Samuel as his partner, and they built a small sawmill near the creek. But contentment didn't mean there weren't challenges. When Elizabeth was 2, Clara discovered she was pregnant again. This time, the pregnancy was easier, but the birth was harder. Their son Thomas came into the world blue and silent, and for 3 terrifying minutes, Clara watched her husband breathe life into their child, refusing to give up, even when it seemed hopeless. When Thomas finally cried, Jacob collapsed beside the bed, sobbing with relief and exhaustion. Clara reached for him with one hand while holding their son with the other. "You saved him," she whispered. "You brought him back." "I couldn't lose him," Jacob rasped. "Couldn't lose either of you. I can't." "You didn't. We're here. We're all here together." Thomas proved to be a strong, healthy boy despite his difficult entry into the world. He had Clara's stubborn determination and Jacob's steady patience. Elizabeth adored her baby brother, insisting on helping with everything, from changing his diapers to singing him lullabies. One evening, when Thomas was 6 months old, Clara found Jacob sitting on the porch steps, staring out at the mountains. She settled beside him, their shoulders touching. "What are you thinking about?" she asked. "How different my life could have been. If you hadn't shown up that night, if I'd kept myself locked away in grief, I'd have missed all of this." He gestured at the cabin, the garden, the clothesline with tiny shirts and dresses flapping in the breeze. "I'd have missed you, missed Elizabeth, missed Thomas. I'd have been alive, but I wouldn't have been living." Clara leaned her head on his shoulder. "I think about that too. How close I came to giving up in that frozen forest. How close I came to never knowing what it felt like to be loved, to be safe, to be home." "You gave me a second chance at life," Jacob said. "At being a husband, a father, at being happy." "You gave me a first chance," Clara replied. "My first chance at all those things. We rescued each other." He kissed the top of her head. "Best rescue of my life." Their daughter Grace arrived during another spring storm, 3 years after Thomas. By then, they'd added 2 rooms to the cabin, and the walls were covered with Elizabeth's drawings and Thomas's muddy handprints. The property had grown too. More cleared land, a proper barn, a henhouse, and a root cellar that could store enough food to last through even the harshest winter. Clara had also become something of a legend in the mountain communities. Women who found themselves in desperate situations, running from violence, widowed and alone, fleeing forced marriages, somehow found their way to the Thorn cabin. Clara and Jacob never turned anyone away. They'd built a small bunkhouse where women could stay while they healed, learned skills, and figured out their next steps. "You're doing what someone did for you," Jacob said one night as they watched a young woman named Sarah teach Elizabeth how to braid hair. Sarah had arrived 3 weeks earlier with a black eye and a broken arm, fleeing a husband who saw her as property. Now she was smiling, healing, learning to hope again. "We're doing what someone did for me," Clara corrected. "This is our mission, Jacob, both of us." He pulled her close. "Have I told you today that I love you?" "Only 3 times. You're slacking." "I love you." He kissed her forehead. "I love you." Her nose. "I love you." Her lips. There, back on track. Grace proved to be their wildest child, born laughing, as Clara always said. She had no fear, climbing trees before she could properly walk, befriending every creature she encountered, and following her father around the timber sites like a devoted shadow. One summer day, when Grace was 4, she got separated from Jacob while he was working. The little girl had wandered off, chasing a butterfly, and when Jacob turned around, she was gone. The panic that seized him was primal. He shouted her name until his voice was hoarse, organized all the workers into a search party, and sent word to Clara and the neighbors. For 3 hours, they combed the forest, calling, searching, praying. It was Clara who found her, Following instinct more than logic, she headed toward the old hunting shack Jacob had shown her years ago, the place where he used to go when the grief was too heavy before she arrived. And there was Grace, curled up asleep on the floor, using an old blanket as a pillow, completely unaware of the panic she'd caused. Clara scooped her up, holding her so tight, Grace squeaked in protest. "Mama, you're squishing me!" "Good. I'm going to squish you for the rest of your life for scaring us like that." When they returned to the search party, Jacob's knees buckled with relief. He took Grace from Clara's arms and just held her, his face buried in her wild curls. "Never again," he said, his voice shaking. "Grace Elizabeth Thorne, you never wander off like that again. Do you understand me?" "But Papa, I was following the butterfly and then I got sleepy, so I took a nap like you taught me. If you're ever lost, find shelter and wait. That's what you said." Despite everything, Jacob laughed. "That's exactly what I said. You're absolutely right." He looked at Clara over their daughter's head, and she saw the fear still lingering in his eyes. She was listening. Our little wild thing was actually listening. That night, after all three children were asleep, Jacob and Clara stood in the doorway of their room, looking at their sleeping babies. Not so much babies anymore, but still their children, their miracles. "I never knew it was possible to be this terrified and this happy at the same time," Jacob said quietly. "Welcome to parenthood," Clara replied, with a tired smile, "where every day you're sure you're failing, and every day they prove you're doing better than you think." He wrapped his arms around her from behind, resting his chin on her shoulder. "How did we get here, Clara? From that frozen night to this. One day at a time, one choice at a time, one moment of saying together at a time." "Together," he echoed, and she felt him smile against her hair. "Always together." Outside, the stars wheeled overhead, marking the passage of another day in a life neither of them could have imagined. Inside, a family slept peacefully, safe and warm and loved. A family built from two broken people who'd found each other in the darkness and chosen to become each other's light. The years that followed brought both joy and hardship, as all lives in the wilderness do. Jacob expanded his timber operation, and Clara became known throughout the mountain communities as someone who helped those in need, taking in travelers caught in storms, teaching women to shoot and defend themselves, always remembering what it meant to be vulnerable and afraid. They had 3 children, a daughter they named Elizabeth after Jacob's first wife, honoring her memory instead of hiding from it, a son called Thomas who had his father's strength and his mother's fierce determination, and another daughter, Grace, who arrived during a spring blizzard and came into the world laughing. Jacob built additions to the cabin as their family grew, each new room constructed with the same care he'd shown Clara that first night. And every winter, when the first truly cold night arrived, he would pull her close and whisper, "I'll be your fire," and she would smile against his chest and answer, "And you'll be mine," always together. On their 20th anniversary, sitting on the porch they'd built together, watching their grandchildren play in the meadow, Clara looked at the silver ring that had never left her finger. "Do you ever think about that night?" Jacob asked, his arm around her shoulders. "When you showed up half frozen?" "Every day," Clara said softly. "I think about how close I came to giving up, how the cold almost won. And then I think about how you saw me, truly saw me, when I was at my lowest, and you treated me like I was worth saving. You were, you are." He kissed her temple. "Best decision I ever made, bringing you into my cabin that night. Second best, Clara corrected with a smile. The best decision was asking me to stay. As the sun set over the mountains, painting the sky in shades of fire, Jacob Thorne and Clara Thorne sat together in the home they'd built, surrounded by the family they'd created, warmed by a love that had been born on the coldest night and had never stopped burning. Some loves are gentle things, blooming slowly in sunshine, but theirs had been forged in ice and darkness, two desperate souls finding each other when they needed it most. And perhaps those loves, the ones born of survival and choice and fierce determination, burn brightest of all. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I'd love to know where you're enjoying this tale from. Are you listening at home, during your commute, or perhaps while working? Please subscribe to the From Wild West channel and share your thoughts in the comments below. What did you think of Jacob and Clara's journey? Your feedback means the world to us.